Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, September 8th, 2024, and I'm here with a few thoughts from Ohio State's thoroughly dominant 56-0 bludgeoning of Western Michigan in the Horseshoe last night. Now, through these first couple of weeks, we've seen Mid-American Conference teams go into the stadiums of top 10 opponents and hold their own. Yesterday in South Bend, perfect example, unranked Northern Illinois shocked number 5 Notre Dame. And then in Happy Valley, Bowling Green took number 8 Penn State down to the wire. And even just last week, Western Michigan held a fourth quarter lead over Wisconsin in Madison. Now, I know the Badgers aren't a top 10 team, but they're still a quality Big Ten opponent. But against the Broncos last night in the Horseshoe, Ohio State would be allowing nothing of the sort. From the opening kick, the Buckeyes immediately snuffed out any notion that the Broncos would make this a game. Ohio State put up 213 yards of total offense and 21 points in the first quarter alone. Will Howard finished the first quarter 10 of 11 for 177 yards and a touchdown. Jeremiah Smith had 3 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown in the first quarter. Now, for Ohio State fans of a certain vintage, Smith's 70-yard catch and run for the second score of the game will bring back memories of Terry Glenn against Notre Dame back in 1995. Regis Philbin must have been turning over in his grave after watching that play from Smith last night. If you don't know what I'm referring to, jump on YouTube and search Terry Glenn, Notre Dame 1995. You'll see what I mean. Now, the closest the Broncos came to scoring in this game was a 6-play, 55-yard drive on their second possession of the game in the first quarter. That drive ended at the Ohio State 25-yard line with a 42-yard field goal attempt that bounced off the right upright. After that, the Bronco offense would not possess the ball on Ohio State's side of the field again. The Buckeye defense held Western Michigan to 99 yards of total offense en route to their first shutout since a 42 blowout of Cincinnati back in 2019. I was actually at that game. So as I like to do, I'm going to tick down a short list of observations here. I'm going to assume you watched and or you have access to the internet and you already know what happened in this game. So I'm not going to recap every single play. I want to start with the play of the Ohio State offensive line. And of course, we have to caveat this with it was only Western Michigan. And of course, I'm just a fan with an untrained eye for the complexities of offensive line play. But I thought the offensive line was really, really good yesterday. Now, for the second week in a row, the Buckeyes would be without left guard Donovan Jackson. Jackson was in uniform, and he went through warm-ups, but he was held out again for the second week in a row as a precaution. And the Buckeyes would not need him, as it would turn out. It was interesting. During the telecast, Jake Butt, he's the former Michigan tight end who was the analyst on the BTN broadcast, he could not stop talking about the push the Ohio State offensive line was getting on the Western Michigan defensive front. And what I really loved was that we saw Buckeye offensive linemen getting to the second level to help spring Trey Henderson and Quinshon Judkins for big runs. I remember specifically Josh Fryer had a great block at the second level on a Western Michigan linebacker to help Judkins get loose for a 23-yard touchdown run at the end of the first quarter. That was awesome to see. We didn't see a lot of that last season. And look, Josh Fryer, you know, he's taken his fair share of criticism, but on that play last night, and I don't think it was the only time he did it, he looked great getting out there at the second level and making that block to spring Judkins for that touchdown run. Now, I don't think it was until garbage time in the fourth quarter that Western Michigan had a tackle behind the line of scrimmage. I think they ended up recording 5 tackles for loss, which is a little surprising when you look at the box score. But through the first 3 quarters against the Ohio State first team, Will Howard was not sacked, and Henderson and Judkins were not tackled behind the line of scrimmage. And man, there were gaping holes all night for those two. Judkins would finish the night as Ohio State's leading rusher with 108 yards on 9 carries for a whopping 12 yards per carry. Trey Henderson finished with 66 yards on 10 carries. Henderson and Judkins accounted for 4 rushing touchdowns. As a team, the Buckeyes finished the night with 273 yards rushing at 7 yards per attempt and 6 rushing touchdowns. And they did all that without their starting first-team All-Big Ten left guard in Donovan Jackson. So that's pretty impressive. And it was really fun to watch Chip Kelly in his bag, calling what seemed like every variation of run play that exists. So I took a look at Ross Fulton's timeline from the game last night. Now, Fulton is one of the film nerds that I follow on X, and here are a few of his comments from the game. This was actually during the game as he was watching. Here we go. Chip Kelly in his bag. Counter speed option. Outside zone to the boundary. Crack toss. Same side inside zone fold. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know what all that means, but even to my untrained eye, there was a creativity in the Ohio State run game that I don't think we've seen in a very long time. We actually may have never seen what we saw last night from an Ohio State run game. Just a ton of variety, a ton of creativity. Western Michigan they were on their heels from the jump, and they were really helpless to stop the Ohio State run game yesterday. One thing I loved was on Ohio State's first touchdown, Kelly used 4 tight ends in the formation to get Trey Henderson into the end zone. I absolutely loved that. That was so much fun. And I also thought, despite the holding call, I think it was on Bryson Rodgers that nullified what I think would have been a 70-yard touchdown run by Quinshon Judkins, that the Ohio State receivers were actually much better blocking downfield in the run game than they were in the opener. So there was a ton to like, both from the play of the offensive line and the play calling in the Ohio State run game yesterday. Just a ton of fun. And if Ohio State's going to run the football like that from here on out, I mean, that offense is going to be indefensible. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ohio State passing game. Now, yesterday, we watched 2 former Ohio State quarterbacks in Quinn Ewers and Kyle McCord put up huge numbers in big wins. And of course, that had a lot of Buckeye fans, myself included, talking about what might have been if Ewers most especially, but also Kyle McCord, had stayed in Columbus. I think it's been a fascinating last 6 years for the Ohio State program when it comes to quarterbacks. If you go back to 2018, I think that's when it all started, when Dwayne Haskins beat out Joe Burrow for the starting job that season. Now, Burrow, as we know, he would eventually go on to fame and fortune, winning the Heisman Trophy and a national title in 2019 after transferring to LSU. But that wasn't until after Dwayne Haskins shattered every single season school passing record for the Buckeyes in 2018. And then after Haskins, Justin Fields would transfer from Georgia to lead Ohio State to consecutive playoff appearances in 2019 and 2020. Fields was, of course, followed by 2 seasons of C.J. Stroud, who was hands down the best quarterback to ever play at Ohio State. And then after a 36-year drought, Haskins, Fields, and Stroud would all go on to be first-round draft picks. I mean, before that, Art Schlichter in 1982 was the last Ohio State quarterback drafted in the first round. And then even last year, Kyle McCord became only the 7th quarterback in Ohio State's 134-year history to throw for over 3,000 yards before transferring to Syracuse, where he is now putting up video game numbers. I mean, McCord has 735 yards passing and 8 touchdowns in only 2 games for the Orangemen. I mean, wow. So, Ohio State has been, outside of what Lincoln Riley has done at Oklahoma and at USC, Ohio State has been one of 2 epicenters, I think, in quarterback play in the country. If you look at the players that have come through that program and either stayed and had great success for Ohio State or went on to other programs and had great success, it has been a really, really fascinating period in Ohio State football history in terms of quarterback play. Now you have Will Howard, the Kansas State transfer. He enters the discussion. Now, he's only just beginning to author his legacy at Ohio State. Howard is a graduate transfer. He's only going to have this one season to really leave his mark in Columbus. Now, through 2 games, Howard is completing 65% of his passes at 9.6 yards per attempt. It's only 2 games, but that per attempt average is actually better than C.J. Stroud's 2022 season. Through 2 games, Howard has 5 touchdown passes and so far no turnovers. He already seems to have the ultimate trust of Ryan Day and Chip Kelly in this offense. They seem to trust him with making a lot of really important decisions in this offense. Now, there are going to be much tougher tests for Howard on the horizon, but so far, I think he's been the perfect trigger man for this offense. He had almost 300 yards passing yesterday, only the 1 touchdown. 18 to 26 for 292 yards and 1 touchdown pass, but he also ran for a 6-yard touchdown. I think he'll only continue to get better. Now, Stroud and McCord, I think they have more arm talent, But I think Howard has already shown that he can make, all the throws required of a quarterback to run Ryan Day's offense. And while we have only seen small glimpses of it so far, what Howard can do as a runner really sets him apart in the playmaking department from the last two kids to play quarterback for Ohio State. I also think, it's not entirely out of the question, and I said this during the offseason, that Howard could get an invite to New York as a Heisman finalist. And funny enough, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that there could be as many as 3 quarterbacks who once played for Ryan Day in New York as Heisman finalists. And I'm talking about Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, along with Will Howard. I know a lot of football left to be played. We're only headed into week 3, but it's fun to think about. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that could happen. Now, if Howard does end up in New York, he'll have the generational talent of Jeremiah Smith to thank for that. And I want to underscore how special Smith has been. And I mentioned this on last Sunday's pod. Think of all the great receivers that have come through this program over the last 40 years, and even more recently. You can go from Chris Carter in 1984, that was his freshman season, to Marvin Harrison Jr. in 2021, and every great receiver in between who ended up putting up huge numbers at Ohio State and going on to fame and fortune in the NFL. None of those players through the first 2 games of their careers came even close to what Jeremiah Smith has done. 11 receptions for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns, 19.2 yards per reception. This isn't hyperbole. What we're seeing right now from Smith is generational. It's a fucking Haley's comment. We may never see something like this again. And, to think this kid has made many Ohio State fans almost completely forget about Marvin Harrison Jr., who just won the Biletnikoff Award and was a top 4 pick in the 2024 NFL draft, is just absurd. I mean, that's how great Smith has been through 2 games. Now, much stiffer tests coming for Smith down the line, but man, it is truly remarkable what he has done through these first 2 games. Now, on defense, it was another stifling performance from the Silver Bullets last night. Again, only 99 yards of total offense for the Broncos in this game. The Buckeyes held Western Michigan to 0.9 yards per attempt in the run game. They finished with 3 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. They did not force a turnover in this game, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Jim Knowles was bringing pressure from all over the field. He even sent Davison Igbinosun on a blitz at one point, and Igbinosun managed to bat a pass down on that play. Cody Simon came back from his 1-game absence, and he made his presence felt right away, sacking Western Michigan Hayden Wolf for a 7-yard loss on the 3rd play from scrimmage. Simon finished as Ohio State's highest graded defender with a grade of 87.7. It was really good to have him back. Jack Sawyer also had a big night. He led the Buckeyes with 6 pressures and had his first sack of the season. Sawyer was Ohio State's 2nd highest graded defender in this game, according to PFF, with a grade of 85.3. I also love what I saw from Caleb Downs in this game. We saw him several times shoot up from his safety spot to make a play at the line of scrimmage. That was awesome to see. He's so smart. Downs was Ohio State's 2nd leading tackler last night with 4. And, his presence on the back end of that defense opens up all kinds of possibilities for Jim Knowles and this defense. We started to see it last night. Knowles was a lot more aggressive, bringing pressures from the 2nd level, and that's because he knows he has Caleb Downs patrolling the back end of that defense. So that was great to see. There were a lot of snaps for Ohio State reserves last night, and I thought backup defensive tackle Caden McDonald played really well last night. 14 snaps for McDonald. He finished with a PFF grade of 82.1. I also thought Lorenzo Styles Jr. was really good in this game, both on special teams and at cornerback. Styles finished with a really solid PFF grade of 79.1. And there was a lot of chatter about Styles during the offseason as a guy who could emerge in that secondary and play some meaningful snaps for the Buckeyes in what we think is going to be a very long season. And it was just one of those nights on defense where everything was clicking, a lot of players getting into the act and making plays. And I could sit here all day singling kids out, which I won't do, of course. And, Ohio State made it out of this game without any injuries, which was huge. Just a lot of fun to watch on both sides of the ball. You had Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles in their bags, getting creative, doing a lot of really fun stuff. Now, again, much bigger tests are on the horizon, although perhaps they won't be quite the tests we anticipated when we looked at the schedule during the offseason. More on that in a minute. Now, the Buckeyes head into the first of 2 off weeks. They have next Saturday off. They return to action on September 21st against Marshall in the Horseshoe. The Thundering Herd were 30-10 losers to Virginia Tech yesterday. So, all right, before I let you go, I have a few quick thoughts on some other games around the country. First, let's start with number 10, Michigan's 31-12 home loss to number 3, Texas. Shout out to Paige. He was all over this one. I thought this game would be much closer. I thought the Michigan defense would be able to keep them in this game. That was not the case. And quite frankly, I was very surprised at how bad Quinn Ewers and the Texas offense made the Michigan defense look in this game. Texas led this one 31-3 after 3 quarters before kind of letting their foot off the pedal in the fourth quarter. I was really impressed both by Quinn Ewers, obviously 246 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. But I thought the Texas offensive line was awesome in this game. Those dudes are huge. I think they said on the telecast they've combined for over 100 starts. So very talented, huge, and very experienced. That Texas offensive line is a force to be reckoned with. And I thought they did a great job really neutralizing Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and that Michigan defensive line. The key to Michigan's success the last 3 seasons was controlling the line of scrimmage and taking care of the football. They weren't able to do either of those things yesterday. Only 3.7 yards per carry in the run game. They were -3 in turnover margin. They have a young quarterback in Davis Warren learning on the job. Warren threw 2 picks yesterday. I mean, other than tight end Colston Loveland, they have no other receiving threats on that offense. From what I've seen out of the last 2 weeks from Michigan, I think they'll be lucky to win 8 games this season. I think there are maybe only 2 other guaranteed wins for them on the schedule. And then the rest of the schedule, I don't know, man. A lot of toss-ups. And then you have games against USC, Ohio State, Oregon that I just don't think Michigan has any chance of winning. Maybe they could beat Oregon, but USC and Ohio State, boy, those look like, at this stage, unwinnable games for Michigan. Now, I was barely able to stay awake for the whole game, but I did manage to watch number 7 Oregon hold on for dear life to squeak out a 37-34 home win over Boise State. Atticus Sappington kicked the game-winning field goal for the Ducks as time expired. Now, I think Paige, Chad, and I had a pretty good handle on this game. We thought Oregon would eke this one out. They wouldn't cover. Now, the Ducks trailed by 6 at the half. Only 353 yards of total offense in this game for Oregon. They continue to have trouble protecting Dylan Gabriel. Gabriel was sacked 3 times in the opener by Idaho. He was sacked 4 more times last night by the Broncos. And for the second straight game, Oregon could not run the football. Only 3.1 yards per carry for the Ducks in the run game. On the other side of the ball, the Oregon defense was shredded for 221 yards rushing by the Broncos. Ashton Genty was responsible for most of that with 192 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. Boise State averaged 6.7 yards per carry against the Oregon defense last night. What kept Oregon in this game was 2 second-half touchdowns in the return game. Tez Johnson ran a punt back 85 yards for a touchdown in the third quarter. Noah Whittington returned to kickoff for a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Oregon heads into the Civil War next week with Oregon State. That game's in Corvallis. That should be another nail-biter for Duck fans. I don't think there's any guarantee Oregon gets out of there with a win. They could very easily lose that game. PVH, I know you're calling an upset for the Beavers in that game. We'll see how that one plays out. To me, Oregon looks like a total fraud as a national title contender through these first couple of weeks. They have some really good skill talent, to be sure, but they can't run the football. They can't protect their quarterback. And to me, they don't look very special at all on defense. And now that trip to Eugene on October 12th for the Buckeyes doesn't really look as harrowing to me as it did just a couple of weeks ago. Another game I want to quickly mention here, as I think it affects the Buckeyes, and I mentioned it earlier, Penn State struggling mightily at home against Bowling Green. The Nittany Lions trailed by as many as 10 in this game. They trailed by 4 at the half. I think Penn State might have been smelling themselves a little bit after that win at West Virginia last Saturday. I personally thought they got way too much credit for that win. West Virginia stinks. Now, what stood out to me in this game was the success Bowling Green had throwing the football. Connor Bazelak hit the Penn State secondary for 254 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. He also did throw 2 pretty bad picks that really helped turn the game in Penn State's favor. The Falcons were also able to run the ball reasonably well against that vaunted Penn State front, 4.7 yards per carry for the Falcons in the run game. You know, I said it when we looked at the schedule a few weeks back. I think the Penn State defense is going to take a couple steps back this season. You don't lose Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and Kalen King to the NFL and get better. Sorry, that's just not how it works. And I think the Falcons showed us that yesterday. Now, the Lions pulled away late on the strength of 100-yard rushing performances from Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. It was also a big day for Penn State tight end Tyler Warren, 146 yards on 8 catches for Warren. Yeah, Ohio State's visit to Happy Valley on November 2nd is still almost 2 months away, and a lot can happen between now and then. But I got to say, that game doesn't really look quite as harrowing to me now as it did just a couple of weeks ago. So you have Michigan in a clear rebuild, Oregon looking like a total fraud, Penn State life and death to beat Bowling Green at home. Iowa still can't score. They lost at home yesterday to unranked Iowa State. I'm being totally serious here with this question. Is Nebraska the best team left on Ohio State's schedule? They looked pretty impressive yesterday, dominating Colorado 28-10. I don't know. We will explore that question on our next pod. I think that's going to do it for me today. Look for another pod from Paige, Chad, and me, probably this coming Thursday. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.